Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining on the session on data management, data governance, and all about DMP online. Today, first of all, we're just going to go over who we are as a team in digital research services, and then I'll go over everything you should know or be aware of before you start your DMP. And then we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of exactly what you need to include in your DMP, such as how to describe your data, how you generate or collect your data, documentation, any ethical or legal concerns, your storage options, who will be responsible for what, and our university policies. There will also be a list of resources at the end and also some time for questions. So who are the digital research team? So we're a team that sits in the Directorate of the Digital and Information Services, or DDIS, and we have the know-how to provide bespoke technical solutions to your research needs. We combine our knowledge of the research community and the research process with our technical expertise to provide the best solution for you. As part of my role in the digital research team, I review DMPs as well and also provide teaching sessions such as this one to provide the information, that knowledge to you guys. So our services cover the access, use and support with the high performance computer, the HPC, access and support to our survey and data entry tools, such as a REDCap and SNAP, one-on-one consultancy for research solutions, DMP support, data management support, and access to the Data Safe Haven and the Safe Pod. So before we go into what you need for a DMP, first of all, what is a DMP? So DMP, or a data management plan, is a formal living document that outlines how your data will be handled before, during, and after your project. The term living here describes the fact that your document can change and be updated as your project progresses. Now most funding bodies are now expecting to see a DMP in place and for it to be maintained and updated throughout the project's life cycle. I'm just going to go over a brief outline of some data protection laws that you should be aware of before you start. One of the laws here you'll need to be aware of is the Data Protection Act of 2018, which outlines how personal data should be handled in a lawfully and ethical way. And it also stresses the use of that the use of personal data should be explicit and transparent to the data provider. Another of these laws is the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. This is a set of regulation that outlines the rights data providers have over their own data, including the need to be explicit in how data will be handled and requiring consent for its collection, processing, and storage. In a research context, however, there are restrictions and exceptions to some of these rights, such as the right to withdraw your data, which may not be possible after it's been anonymized, for example, but these exemptions also need to be made explicit to the data provider as well. Another thing you may need to consider before you start your DMP is whether you need to fill out a Data Protection Impact Assessment, or DPIA. If you answer yes to any of the questions that you see on screen, you may need to fill one out. However, you do not need to do this alone. You can contact a member of the information governance team for more guidance on DPIAs and how to fill one out. If you are in any doubt, please just ask. The information governance email is on screen right now. So where can a DMP be created? We at the university have a subscription to a tool called DMPonline. It's free for you to use because we have a subscription to it, and all you have to do is create an account and then set it up with your UOA institutional login. Once that is done, you can start creating a DMP. And as a bonus, you can create a test DMP just to see how the tool works and how it is laid out, and you can get familiar with how it all works. So when creating a DMP, you'll need to be aware that each funding body will have slightly different requirements, but what they will be after will be outlined in each section of the DMP. As an example here, I've got the Medical Research Council as part of my test DMP, and you can see that they've got a little tab at the side here next to the Data Curation Centre and also our institutional guidance there as well. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what should be included in your DMP. First of all, with how you will be describing your data. So you'll need to think about the type of study that you'll be participating in, such as a retrospective, prospective, or a case control study. These are not exhaustive lists, just examples to get you thinking about the types of questions that you'll be asked in your DMP. Um, Here you'll need to outline the type of data that you'll collect or generate, such as qualitative, quantitative, text or images or videos, measurements, computer models or samples. Also thinking about the file format that it's going to take and roughly how much data you will be producing. Um, so that's in the following question. Following on from the type of data, you will need to think about how much data you will have and what format it will take. Will you have a couple of gigabytes or multiple terabytes of data? What format will it take and why, such as comma separated value files or text files? You will also need to think about the software that can read the file formats you choose, but that will come in a later section. I'll go over that. So now we're going to start thinking about the methods of data collection or data generation as well. This is where we can think about the software that you will use for collecting, generating, or processing your data and why, such as spreadsheet software such as Excel, statistical analysis software, survey tools, or audiovisual recording or transcription software. If you're thinking about your software, you'll need to be aware that about using third-party software. If this is the case, you may need to fill out a supplier, cyber, and data assessment. But as before, if in doubt, please just ask. You will also need to think about how you can ensure your data quality and what methods you'll use and why, such as using data coding, data cleaning, or standardization. So now we're going to talk about data management, documentation, and curation. Here, you will need to think about how best to store your data, such as in your C drive, H drive, shared drive, or even in cloud storage or an external method. You'll also need to think about how the data is managed in your storage solution and does it get a backup solution and how that works. We would recommend against using external storage methods such as external hard drives or pen drives as they can be fragile. The examples you can see here are two situations at the university where a fire has happened. Um, and other examples can include that your external storage solution can be dropped, corrupted, lost, or in the example here, irreparably damaged. When they do get damaged, it can be extremely difficult to recover the data stored within, and the data will likely be unrecoverable. So you just got to keep that one in mind. We would also recommend against using your H or C drive to store your data. Your H drive is only supposed to be used for personal work, and your C drive for transient storage, which should be backed up on a shared drive or cloud storage. You'll also need to think about the main risks to your data and how you'll mitigate those risks. It will be worth thinking about the type of data again, as this can gear your answer. Personal and sensitive data will be at higher risk to store just due to the nature of the data. Examples of risk can be data corruption, accidental or deliberate deletion, human error, data leaking, and ways to mitigate can include storing them in shared drives where only certain people can access them, encryption, and anonymization. Metadata and other documentation that goes along with your data will help to describe your data, how it was produced and processed, with what methods and procedures and why. It adds context to your data, and you will need to think about the metadata standards you will implement. But there are resources at the bottom of the slide and also at the end, going into more detail about different metadata standards. You will need to outline your data preservation strategy. This will include what data will be kept, how long it will be kept, where it will be kept, and for how long. You will also need to think about the format here as well to account for any software changes, upgrades, and decommissions, and if your data can still be accessible. You will also need to outline the policies and standards that you will be following here as well. Here we'll be talking about all things data security and confidentiality. You will need to think about how you will protect your data, with what standards or policies you will follow and why, your data storage method, who will have access and for how long, and how the risks to your data will be mitigated. You will go into more detail as in the previous section that I talked about. This section will concern how you can share your data, what restrictions may need to be in place, and who will have access to your data. So when thinking about sharing your data, you will need to think about whether it is suitable to share, and if not, how you can make it shareable. You need to make sure that you have the right permissions and consent in place to share your data, whether you need an exclusivity period, or who will or can have access to your data, which we will touch on a little bit later. In this section, you'll provide an outline where you can or will share your data, such as in a repository, the methods and costs of preserving the data you want to keep, and exactly what data and support and documentation will be preserved. You will also need to think about the discoverability of your data, how best to share it, such as through presentations, with peer on the web, or through word of mouth. This is where you will need to think about who can have access to your data and who will determine how best to manage this access. Following on from governing access, you may need to think about whether a data sharing agreement needs to be in place for your data. Uh, the most likely answer will be yes, you will need a data sharing agreement. This is where you will outline who will be responsible for the different aspects of your project. Um, as the PI, you are ultimately responsible for what happens in your project, but you can delegate tasks and activities. And some examples of roles you can see on the screen, such as for data capture, metadata curation, quality assurance, storage and backup, data archiving, data sharing, and more roles as well. This is not an exhaustive list, just again some examples to get you thinking about who can do what and how. This is where you will outline the policies you will be following in your project in your DMP. All of our institutional policies can be found in the policy zone, which is linked on screen now. But you will also need to include any school-specific, departmental, or study-specific policies as well. I'm just going to outline some common pitfalls that we see when reviewing DMPs. So first of all, the type format and volume of data covering everything from file format, such as CSV files, PDFs, MP3, MP4 files for audio. The reasoning behind using the file format and the volume of the data that you will collect, you need to be very specific in what kind of data that you will be collecting and storing. You need to be specific in who owns the data and how the data will be backed up, secured, and stored. And also outline any backup schedules, the method of storage, such as using shared drives, and the security measures that you will be implementing. Data sharing will cover the data sharing agreements, what data can and will be shared, and what data will be kept or destroyed. What also needs to be done to the data to make it as shareable, such as anonymization, where it will be shared. It will also cover who can access your data and under what conditions, if they need to go through access requests, and who will handle those requests. The bottom line here is to be concise but specific in exactly what you're going to be doing with your data. Here I'm just going to outline some of the support and resources that you have when filling out your DMP. When you've started or finished creating your DMP, you can request feedback from us by selecting the request feedback option across the toolbar on the top of your DMP. This will come straight to us at Digital Research. We can provide commentary on your DMP, and this will appear in the form of comments in each section of your DMP. Here are the list of resources I used throughout this presentation, but we are also available to answer any questions that you have regarding data management, DMP, DMPonline, just by emailing digitalresearch@abdn.ac.uk. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening, and we now have some time for questions.
So I'm just going to stop the recording. So if anyone's got any questions, that's the recording